Welcome to the Land to Lots podcast, powered by Launch Development Finance Advisors. And now your host, Carter Froelich.
Hello, everybody. This is Carter Froelich, and welcome to the next edition of the Land to Lots podcast. In this podcast, this is number 3 of our series as it relates to the management of a financing through the launch sequence. And if this is your first podcast, I really encourage you to go back and listen to the previous podcast as it relates to the launch sequence, because this is a process. This is a unique process that we use at launch with our clients to plan the transaction, which is the first phase of the launch sequence, to implement the transaction, which is nothing more than implementing that which is planned, and that is the second component of the launch sequence. And then the third and final segment of the launch sequence is managing the financing, and this is the third podcast related to managing the financing. We are going to talk about, number 1, performing the developer continuing disclosure obligation, and then number 2, the issuance of additional bonds as it relates to the financing. As part of every bond transaction, the SEC and as part of your bond documents are going to require that the developer report, and this could be on a quarterly basis, or this could be a biannual basis, meaning every 6 months, reporting back to the bond buyers through an electronic medium, which we call EMMA, what the status is of the financing, and have any material events occurred as defined in the continuing disclosure obligation that the bond buyers should be aware of and concerned about. So really, what the purpose of the continuing disclosure obligation is to just give the bond buyers some indication of, is the project on track as it was described to me and to us when we purchased the bonds, as outlined in the official statement that was presented to us related to our ability to purchase these bonds. The information that the developer will have to be providing on a quarterly or every 6-month basis is very similar to the information that was initially included in the official statement. Oftentimes it'll call out, meaning the continuing disclosure obligation, that the developer will update tables 3, 4, 5, and 6. And here again, I'm just making up those numbers, but tables 3, 4, 5, and 6 really relate to where are we in the construction process, what is our budget, how much has been constructed to date, have there been any significant change orders, how much remains to be financed. Or it may be related to how many builders do we have in the project, have we sold any more lots to builders, and then what have the builders sold over the quarter, over the 6-month period to homeowners. Also, the bond buyers will be notified if there have been any material events that may have occurred since the last reporting. These material events can include bankruptcy, failure to pay property taxes, failure to pay debt service related to the bonds, etc. But really, this is meant to give the bond buyers an early warning. Are we going to have a potential problem with this financing or not? Or does it look like everything is going as we had originally intended? So that's really what the purpose is. Now, this is absolutely critical that this go on, because if it is not published, then the financial advisor who is responsible for doing this, and here again, we can do this for our clients, we do it for a lot of our clients, but if the client is not forthcoming in this information, then and they are not making these timely reports, And that's why a lot of times they give it to us, because they forget about it, and whereas we don't, and we can make sure that these reports are prepared and updated, that it gets noted in the electronic publication that the developer has failed to make its publications pursuant to the developer's continuing disclosure obligation. And that looks really bad for the developer. And it would be something that would be taken into consideration for future bond issuances and could cost you a higher interest rate. So it's really, really, really important that this continuing disclosure be done timely, and it be done on a schedule, and it be done in advance, so everybody's not running around at 11 o'clock at night trying to get the continuing disclosure obligation posted prior to the due date. And we're really serious about this, and we're making sure that we're kind of hassle machines as it relates to making sure this gets done, because it is such a critical component of the financing. And oh, by the way, you signed documents indicating that you, as a developer and as a benefiting party to the financing, we're going to do this. Now, this typically continues until the developer drops below certain acreage requirements. In some instances, if we have a master developer that had sold a big chunk of land to a home builder, then the home builder steps into the shoes of the developer. But here again, it's really important that somebody on the team or on the developer staff understand what's required and what needs to be done in the event of certain things occurring as it relates to the sale of land, and how that may or may not impact the continuing disclosure obligation as it relates to the bond issuance for the specific district that you're working in. And as I had indicated on a previous podcast, the other thing that we're always looking at, and as I tell our staff, what we're really tasked with doing for our clients is accelerating cash into the pro forma. So while our developer clients are out building infrastructure, they're negotiating with jurisdictions, with contractors, with home builders to sell land, they're doing other things. We are always watching where we're at as it relates to the construction of infrastructure, the how we're burning through lots, when we may need to open up new phases. Here again, we're working with our clients on a monthly basis. But more importantly, when can we issue bonds, be them revenue bonds, a revenue source? When can we issue general obligation bonds, meaning our assessed valuation contained within the boundaries of the district has increased and we have bonding capacity, and how much is that? Or should we be planning on our next assessment bond issuance and moving that forward? Here again, because we have all of the information, we've worked on the planning, we've worked on the implementation as it relates to all of the tasks that we worked with our clients on the initial phases of the launch sequence, the planning and the implementation. And because we are tracking all of the costs related to the financing and all of the reimbursements that have been processed, we know immediately what infrastructure remains to be financed. So we're able to go and put the bond applications together, the feasibility studies, whatever the term of art is in the state that we're working in, and we're able to tee up that financing. So we just come to our clients and saying, okay, we're ready to go get the next 20 million. Here's what we think we're going to be able to generate. Here is what the infrastructure we're going to finance. What do you think? Our clients say yes, and we go do it. Here again, we're trying to not slow up the process. Our job is to accelerate cash into the pro forma, and that's what we're doing. If launch is not working with your organization to do this, then you really need to have a person on staff that sole responsibility is to do this. Here again, they're going to bring huge returns back to the organization through the timely submission of future bond issuances that will be allowing you to recognize a revenue event and provide either reimbursement for financing that can be returned to equity providers to get you to your promote, or the return of cash, for infrastructure that's been put into the ground that you can now utilize to build next phase infrastructure. So this is a critical component. And here again, we're trying to set up a Swiss clock. So in other words, this is a process that is ingrained in your organization, either through working with us at launch or through some staff that you have earmarked to take care of this for your organization. With this, I'm going to cut this podcast a little bit short. This will be a quickie because the next podcast is going to be going on to another type of management that we can do to find, let's call it cash in the cushions, meaning money that may have been forgotten about as it relates to your projects, and we want to go back and get it. So with that, stay tuned where we talk about the look back diagnostic review and how we can find additional monies for you. And if you find this podcast meaningful and useful, please share it with your colleagues and others in the industry, and subscribe to Land to Lots wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you very much and have a great day.
You have been listening to the Land to Lots podcast with Carter Froelich. Follow us wherever you find your podcast to never miss a new episode.